Come to the next of these services that we're sharing together. We've had a theme that's been running right through, which has been celebrating faith. Not just celebrating, but celebrating the things that emerge from faith. Celebrating those things that are examples of what faith can mean. And we're looking at hope tonight. Generating hope. So a community that has been touched by hope, an individual that has been blessed by hope, is a community or a person that then generates hope in the life setting in which they find themselves. So hope becomes very much an active word. In many ways, hope is the landscape of the Christian faith. It is what is our expression, our declaration, our witness, the very landscape of our faith. There's a good argument that Peter the Apostle is the writer of the letter with this name on. But whether he is or isn't, it comes from a series of documents that we sometimes call, with a boring title really, the general epistles. Who would want to read a general thing? But it's not meant to be general in the sense that it's just anything, but it encapsulates in a real sense what it means to belong and believe. 1 Peter is probably the most loved of the documents that come from that part of the New Testament. Probably the most often read, certainly, of those documents that are filed under that title. It's not absolutely certain where it exactly comes from, but one thing you can say is it's one of the most well-regarded documents on the difficult theme of persecution. One of the most meaningful documents in the New Testament when it comes for what you're up against. And the writer talks about hope in the very real context of things being difficult. The traditional view is that it's written from Rome about AD 67, just after the persecution of Christianity had really begun. Nero had set his eyes and anger on the Christian community. And that's why you get the churches of Asia Minor that become part of the focal point. So let me just try and unpack this hope for a minute. Because I think that's what it's talking about. When Risha read the scriptures to us, she talked about that we've been born into a living hope. What does that living hope mean? Well, first of all, it's hope in difficult times. Perhaps it's a kind of catechism of what the faith means. Yesterday, we had a singer. I spent some time with Colin Buchanan yesterday, and we were talking about the latest document and CD that he's producing. And he's producing something quite old-fashioned, really, a catechism for children. And when we talked together, because we had a few minutes in my room at the studios there to talk, we realized that we do need, again, to be able to teach the faith in such a way that people can not only hang ideas, but they can say to themselves, this works in this context. And you know how a catechism works, a very old-fashioned idea in documents where there's a question and an answer, a question and an answer. Well, the question that we have is, where is hope? Where do you find hope? Well, you find hope most clearly, most authentically, and most obviously in difficult times. If you want to find out what hope is, don't go just to somebody who's massively successful. They may be able to tell you something about worldly success, and I've no doubt they could give a lecture on it. But if you want to learn about hope, go to people who've been through difficult times. And that's clearly, I think, what's being spoken about in these words here. Peter was preparing the church for difficult times. I don't know what it's like, really. We don't have this kind of story, but can you imagine it? When these documents were being read and when they were being taught, there was that eagerness to learn because the times were going to get difficult. And you know, here's the truth. It is going to get difficult. I haven't made it in part of the announcements tonight, but Carol and I are going to Hong Kong this week to preach next weekend. And we've received a number of letters during the last few days of what it means for some of the people there who are frightened about the future. And sometimes we need to say to ourselves, there are some things that could happen in our Australian context that could make us frightened about the future too. We need again to say to ourselves, let's rediscover the power of hope, of what that means and what it can mean in life's circumstances. Some of the strongest words of hope come from the toughest of context. And it tells us here, it suggests we've been given a new birth, a new beginning through hope. Of course, this takes us back to John and the new birth through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. But hope is much more than just being given a new birth. It's living a new birth. Hope liberates. It releases from the past and sets us free. Many often when people are looking for help, they might come into a context and they can never imagine what it means. I remember talking to one of our counsellors in a small room near Quakers Hill and talking about what it was that she was doing with people. And I said to her, when do you know that things have clicked together and the person's got real hope? She said, I can remember it on one occasion distinctly. That she'd been working with someone over a period of time and spending time trying to put up models of what hope might look like, sharing what the biblical picture of hope was, trying to help the person find hope. And then the person was walking out of the room and they didn't dance, but they nearly did as they walked away from that interview because hope had clicked in. Hope had occurred. Hope had been spelt out. Hope was now living. It was real in that person's life. When hope gets hold of your life, you're different. And that's the offer that God makes to you and to me. A message that's really powerful. Hope liberates. Hope motivates. I think one of the words that we've got used to now in the last, 15, 20 years is the word resilience. I don't think we used it a lot at one time, but resilience, that bouncing back experience. When things are difficult and we know what it is to bounce back because we've got a resilience. Hope is like that. Hope gives us strength so that we can bounce back in difficult contexts. Hope initiates. Hope sets a person free to dream. The visionary has hope. We need hope in our own lives. And hope activates, makes things happen. It's fuel for action. It makes things happen when we're involved. When you get a community of people who have got hope in their hearts, when you've got a group of people that have allowed themselves to be set free and they're hopeful not only for themselves but for their community and for the world, then things can happen. Because it starts to be spelt out in the specific context. How many times at a Christian wedding have I heard read the words of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love psalm of the Apostle Paul? But we must never forget, and now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. They're brothers and sisters. You read Thessalonians and other places, you'll see the words pulled together in a context there. But they're brothers and sisters. And they belong together. And we hold them up together. And we say, this is what it means for us to believe and belong. In our context at Wesley Mission, it unleashes compassion, helps people to find real purpose in their lives. It has all the trappings of what it means to address that common experience for many people today of hopelessness. There is nowhere to go. No one can help me. I am down. I can't get up. But our hope says, oh, you can. Then, secondly, hope that's always alive. God's given us a living hope. It's not hope in a moment. It is a hope that once it's born in our lives, once we are born into that hope through the Spirit, so that hope not only liberates us in a moment, but it is a constant experience. It is living hope. We'd miss part of what Peter was saying if we became obsessed with the future. You know, I'm glad that, of the experience of the conversation earlier, because when I asked the question, and you can tell that we didn't practice anything, but when I asked people to spell out what hope is not just about the future. It is about now. Well, of course it's about the future. Of course you can't read 1 Corinthians 15. You can't read the great chapters of the New Testament Gospels and not touch on hope when we talk about resurrection. Yes, all that's true. But hope is now. I need something that's going to change my world now. And that living hope, of course, draws on all the strength of that risen Lord into our experience now. Hope is what unites people in a common purpose. When a person's become filled with hope, things change. That's why when you think of the stories of people like Steve Jobs and Nelson Mandela in business and in politics and the world, you see these people and you think, what makes them continue when it looks as though everything in business is going wrong? Makes them continue when they enter their 27th year in a cell? What makes them continue? Hope. Hope that is not just saying, well, one day I'm going to be in heaven. I'm not sure that that's really the right definition of hope, though that is true. Nobody's taking that away, but it is that experience now. I have hope. I believe in the God who is alongside me. I believe in the God who is able to change my perspective on the world. I believe in the God who can transform me where I am. Some anonymous words speak helpfully, and I came across these earlier in the week when I was thinking about tonight. Hope is not the closing of your eyes to the difficulty, the risk, or the failure. It is a trust that if I fail now, I shall not fail forever. That if I am hurt, I shall be healed. It is a trust that life is good and love is powerful. You know, one of the most moving things I experienced was going to Amsterdam one day. I had been speaking in Holland, and the day was ours to do all the things that you would do. We went to the Rijksmuseum and all the things you would do in terms of art, the wonder of Dutch paintings and all of that. But then walked alongside to that little house where a little girl will be written into the history of the world, dear Anne Frank. And to go into that house and see that it very likely was very high, and that she and the family lived there through the horrors of Nazi oppression. I had to make sure there was no light and no sound. You probably know the story of how every day, and her diary is still worth reading today, of how they had to be absolutely silent during the day because there was a printing works underneath. You remember the story, some of you. And they had to make sure nobody had any sound at all, that Anne and the family were upstairs. So they sat in silence in that place. She wrote this. The diary is fantastic. I simply cannot build my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder which will destroy us too. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet when I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that the cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. The sadness, but the reality of the story is that she did not see in this world everything that she hoped for. But there is a sense in which those words are so powerful. I must uphold my ideals and perhaps the time will come. Isn't hope about that? Isn't hope so trusting in Jesus that we cannot be absolutely certain of everything that's going to happen? We can't be certain that tonight what we are longing for in terms of a loved one's illness, in terms of a situation we have to face, is all going to work out well. But this I can be sure of. That my heart, my life, and their life is hid with Christ in God. And that's something of what hope is. It's not everything. Charles Spurgeon, to put it very much into a Christian context, a great Baptist preacher. Hope sees a crown in reserve, mansions in readiness, and Jesus himself preparing a place for us. And by the rapturous sight, she sustains the soul under the sorrows of the hour. Traditional and right. That one day we shall be with him. But thirdly and finally, hope that makes sense for all our lives. Peter's readers couldn't possibly have understood everything that this meant. But when you turn the pages of 1 Peter over, when you get to the 5th chapter, it tells us so much when we read there in verse 12. With the help of Silas, whom I regard as a faithful brother, I've written to you briefly, encouraging you and testifying to you. Then the verse ends up, stand fast in it. That's what you have to do with hope. Stand fast is written elsewhere. Talk about stand fast in the liberty which the Spirit of God gives us. Stand fast in hope. Even when you're tempted to give up, even when you're tempted to choose another, stand fast in Christ. He will sustain you. Encouragement. Preparing one another. A wise person once reflected that we can live about 40 days without food, perhaps 3 days without water, up to 8 minutes without oxygen, but not a second without hope. Hope is part of the substance of life. So when we recognize that hope is essential to living, Christian hope adds to that a dimension that is enormously true. Hope is the greatest gift that leaders can give to their people, or parents can give to their children, teachers can give to their students, and coaches can give to athletes. It's the greatest gift that we can generate in each other. Now, last year, when we went to the UK after Christmas, it was cold, but it wasn't very cold. So we were able to do things, and we were in London, and we took 3 of the grandchildren to the Tower of London. Now, you may say, you take your children to the Tower of London. Isn't that where they lock people up? And no, I won't. If there are young people here, I won't say what they used to do at the Tower of London. But they didn't do it to very many. They only did it to important people there. The rest was done at other places that were less attractive than the Tower of London. But we went to the Tower of London, and it was, you can imagine, they're all boys. It was very exciting. And they all wanted to go to the bad places, you know. Is this where that happened? And we went through all of that. But there were some fantastic stories of people who faced the end of their lives. And as they faced the end of their lives, they saw some amazing thing. On the night before Sir Walter Raleigh was to be executed, he wrote a poem. And this was his poem. Even such is time that takes in trust. Our youth, our joys are all we have. And pays us with age and dust, who in the dark and silent grave, when we have wandered all our ways, shuts up the story of our days. But from this earth, this grave, this dust, my God shall raise me up. I trust. I think it's fantastic to write that. We'd be bothered about all the things that might be happening the next morning. He was, but he saw further than that. He saw hope. He saw hope that is there for every one of us. And if his hope that night before he faces his own execution can be real, then hope can be real for all of us at any time, in any situation. Promise and hope lie at the heart of living out the Christian faith. And as transforming a concept and as practical an outworking of the Christian faith as anything I know. People might say to me, what do you want to happen when people come into either the Wesley Centre, one of our services, a part of the Wesley mission, any of our congregations? Now, as a believing evangelical, I would say, I want them to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and be saved. Yes, of course I do. But I would say something else. I would say I want people to come into this place, or come into our congregations, or come into our services, and discover for themselves that there is hope. That you don't have to get destroyed by this world. That you don't have to be caught up in all those negativisms that is destroying our community. And that is all possible because of Jesus. It is he who gives us hope. It's his hope, his love, his grace, his peace that changes us forever. May we keep in our minds the hope that needs to be there tonight for families, once again, whose lives have been torn apart by the evil of people who would just take people's lives indiscriminately without care. Let's put in our prayers the hope for those people tonight who are, to use the words of Lucy, hanging on. Let's be conscious in our hearts and lives that there is hope. And that hope will shake the foundations of this world when all evil has been thrown at it. Because it's what changes this world. May we have the hope that makes sense of all our lives.